Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to my latest live stream. This is the second of a series, and the intention is to continue going through the accident investigation report that we started on the last one. So let's just get this set up. So there is a bit of a delay between me saying something into this microphone and the electrons finding their way across the internet to yourselves. About a minute delay. So if you do type something, if you've got any questions or comments, please type them in the chat. But just be aware that there is a minute delay. So if you'd be so kind as to type in the chat and let me know that you can hear me, I'd really appreciate it. Fantastic. Okay, well, so we've got a few people on so far. Nobody seems to be chatting just yet. Hopefully you can hear me. There we go. It does seem to be coming out the other side, so you should be able to hear me. Right, okay, well, let's get into this then. So where we started off yesterday was going through the service inquiry investigation report. And I'll just bring this back on the screen here. And we're going to be talking about the HMS Astute submarine accident that occurred in October 2010. So let's just jump down to where we were. So we started off going through the investigation report, section 1, which was the narrative of events. We went through all of those sections, the chronology, the timeline, and then we got to the next section, which is the analysis of the events. Now, this part of the investigation report is split into contributory factors, then it goes to detailed analysis of the navigational plan, then detailed analysis of the execution of the navigation, records, equipment, the damage itself to the submarine, first of class issues, because this was the first of first of the Astute class submarines, and then of course the findings, which is 2 pages, and then the final sort of recommendations section, and that's it. So it's quite a short and sweet investigation report. Mark has said he can hear me. Fantastic, great to see you, Mark. Yes, I'm good. I trust you are. I've still got a bit of a cold, so if I start coughing and snotting, I do apologise. So yeah, great. Let's go to the start of this section then. So just before we continue, so this is where we got to with the preliminary control structure model. So of course this is essentially a collection of what we've termed candidate controllers. These are either individuals or systems or organisations which are mentioned explicitly in the investigation report, though not necessarily with adequate context for a layperson such as myself. And so I've chucked those into a broad sort of hierarchical control structure, starting at the bottom with the submarine itself and the submarine's trajectory. So that is the physical control process that we're interested in. And then I've essentially added some elements to it as we've gone through the report. And I'll continue doing that as we go through the rest of this session today. Now, my intention is to get through the report today. There is a lot to get through, probably more than we got through yesterday. So there is a chance that I'm going to run out of steam and we're going to have to schedule another one of these live streams, which I'll probably just do the same time tomorrow. And then once that's out of the way, I will arrange a live session on Zoom where we can get together, as a private group, and we can talk through this. We can talk about any questions or comments or concerns you have about Stamp STPA Cast and your use of it. And of course, there's likely to be some high caliber people such as Mark and some of the other sort of celebrities of the stamp community, you might say, that are likely to come along and include their experience. So the last one we had was really good. We had a lot of interesting people with some really interesting experience. That was on the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter accident that occurred in the US back in January 2025. And the replay of that is actually available on my YouTube channel if you'd like to watch that. So yeah, if there's any questions before we get stuck in, stick them in the chat. I'll just have a quick drink and then we'll get stuck in. Right, I think we're ready. I think we're raring to go. My computer seems to be a little bit temperamental today, so... Oh, there we go, it's talking to me. There we go. So we've got Mark's comment in there. Right, let's get stuck in then. So everything's going, load of sound, let's go. Right, so analysis of events. So contributory factors. So planning. There was no dedicated plan or specific briefing for the boat transfer scheduled for 06:30 on the morning of the 22nd of October 2010. Excuse me a second. Right. The Submarine had conducted a number of transfers in this area on the previous 6 days, both afternoon and morning. Conduct of boat transfers was therefore reliant on personnel repeating the actions of earlier transfers. A general brief was conducted some days earlier to cover the conduct of noise ranging on the Rona range, and this included some instruction on boat transfers. So I'm just curious, conducted some days early. So there was a general brief conducted some days earlier. Excuse me a second, my live stream seems to be playing up a little bit. Right, it says it's live. It seems to be live. Yeah, I don't know. Let's continue. So a general brief was conducted some days earlier to cover the conduct of noise ranging on the Rona range. So this implies that there is the Rona range, or Butex range should I say, and the personnel involved in that. So let's just, so boat transfer team, let's get the Butex range, and then we've got Butex range control, and then we've got the boat transfer team. So they're kind of, are they part of the Butex range? Pardon me, is there something there that we need to maybe think about? Because, you know, if they're doing boat transfers all the time, who is responsible for those boat transfers and the coordination of them? Mark says it's good, no worries here. Fantastic, thanks Mark. So who is involved in that activity and what is that general brief? And is it appropriate just to have a general brief, or should there also be specific briefs? And it says there's no dedicated plan or specific briefing. Well, why was that? Is that normal common practice, or is there sort of something else going on there? Because of course, we don't want to be, as investigators, we don't want to be focusing on hindsight bias here. We want to be really careful we're not, suffering hindsight bias. So if there wasn't a dedicated plan, was there supposed to be? Or was there not supposed to be? Or was it never defined? Did nobody think that that was an appropriate thing to do? And okay, who was that person or that team, that organisation? And why didn't they do that? What does the control structure look like? Okay. And this included some instruction on boat transfer. Specifically, the CO authorised that both boat transfers would be conducted on the watch at patrol routine. So patrol routine is a sort of readiness state on board the boat. The watch would be supplemented by the XO going to the fin and directing the boat transfer from the secondary navigation position at the rear of the fin. So the watch would be supplemented. Approximately 8 metres from the officer of the watch position. So figure 6, this is the figure 6 here, look. So I think the secondary navigation position is probably this part, and then this is the, what do they call it? The officer of the watch position. So that's quite a distance there. They are quite large, these things. The CO would be in the control room, so that would be down below, probably down here somewhere. Put a big CR, there we go. The CO would be in the control room to meet and greet departing, arriving riders. Yeah, okay. I am guessing about the location of the control room, I don't know, I'm presuming it's down there. Navigation. The navigating officer's workbook did not indicate any prior planning for the boat transfer. So I think the navigation officer, I think we mentioned them yesterday. There we go, there's a navigation officer. There, on that one. So they had a what did they call that thing? The Navigating Officer's Workbook. So that is Navigating Officer's Workbook. So again, I'm just highlighting this here because it might be relevant in terms of shaping people's mental models. I don't know that to be true, but it's a good idea just to capture it at this point in time. And then if we see anything else that's relevant to this, we could maybe explore that. I don't anticipate it being a big thing, but that's fine. Okay, so the Navigating Officer's Workbook did not indicate any prior planning for the boat transfer. Okay, should there have been? This implies that there should be, but again, we're playing the should game, everybody. You know, what is the process? What is the procedure? What is the rules? What was workers done versus workers imagined? Okay, let's get the pen again. So did not indicate prior planning. So is that a contributory control action? They didn't do the planning and they were supposed to do. I'm not sure. I mean, just as a sort of conversation about that, a point about that. When you're reading investigation reports, one of the things that you should always look out for is have a think about the language and the way that the investigation report is laying things out. Because if they kind of lay it out that, oh, well, this is what they should have done. These people, these baddies, these bad apples, they should have done this. And because they didn't do that, then they're obviously bad and that's a problem. And for me, that's not an investigation. That's just ridiculous. What we're here to do is understand, you know, what was the control structure involved in this particular situation? You know, who were the stakeholders? Who were the controllers? What were their interactions? What were their beliefs? What were the decisions that they made that would explain their control actions? Regardless of, you know, judging whether they're good or bad or, you know, they should have done this, they should have done this. Let's understand why they did what they did. Why did it make sense for them to do what they did? You know, if the rules are thou shalt do some prior planning for a boat transfer, fantastic, great. Did the individuals involved know that? You know, were they trained to do that? Were they disciplined? Did they have the resources to do that? Or were they told not to do that? Was there some specific reason why they weren't doing that? You know, so we shouldn't sort of set the scene as this is what they should do and then, oh, they didn't do it, so that's bad. That's not, we shouldn't be doing that. That's not really helpful. It's not really helping at all. I think I've laboured that enough, so I'll get off my hobby horse. Right, okay, so the chart lacked any position, lacked any clear position for the transfer and did not provide any instruction on when to slow down or when to allow the casing party access to the casing. Additionally, there were no instructions on when to call the CO or XO. Again, if you've got some highly skilled people, very experienced, maybe they don't need explicit instructions like this, you know. Anyway, I'll keep moving. I don't know the details. I don't know the context. The plan assumed good visibility, min 3 nautical miles visibility, to allow for a clearing bearing on Pabe Island. I don't know where that is on the map. We could spend some... Oh, there we go. There's Pabe Island. Look at that. Fantastic. So they were going to do some bearings with that. It was decided that the TSO, Lieutenant Commander, the TSO, so we spoke about that yesterday, Tactical and Sonar Officer, would be on the bridge and the Navigating Officer would go to the casing. The third BWQ Seaman Officer of First Watch was landed from the submarine to undertake the duty of Fishing Vessel Liaison Officer at the Rona Range Terminal Building, so RTB. Okay, so let's have a look. So third, let's just take this over here so I can see what I'm doing. So we've got the TSO, we've got the Navigating Officer, we need the third BWQ. So if anyone in chat know what BWQ is, please stick it in the chat for me, that would be helpful. Seaman Officer of First Watch. Oh, was landed. So they're on land, presumably that's what that means. and they are undertaking the duty of the fishing vessel liaison officer, FVLO, and they're at the Rona Range Terminal building. Now that role is a very, very important role in terms of maintaining safe separation from fishing vessels moving around this area, because it is this area of the inner and outer sound is quite a busy area for fishing vessel traffic, and you don't want people colliding with a submarine, and likewise you don't want a submarine colliding with other people. So it's a very important role, and I'm just going to put this sort of over here to do with Butec range control. I'm not going to draw the interactions yet because there's not enough information. I don't want to assume or presume, but that is a really important role. And that, if we're thinking about the type of hazards involved in this particular accident, and this is, I'll just quickly jump to the top here. So whenever we're doing a cast accident analysis, or even when we're doing an STPA analysis, the way I teach this, I split it into three phases. So any stamp-based analysis has broadly three phases. The first is the foundation phase. This is where we set the scene for what we're actually going to use STPA or cast for. And as part of that process, we need to define the losses, hazards, and high-level safety constraints. And when we're talking about losses, what we're talking about is what are the unwanted outcomes that our stakeholders are concerned with. Now, very simplistically, just for this accident and thinking about safety, of course, we don't want death or injury to our crew or third parties. We don't want to damage or destroy our submarine or its capability. And of course, in this case, we're on a range, so we don't want to collide with anybody else, fishing vessels, and we don't want to cause problems for the range, for example. Now, of course, when we're talking about hazards, you'll notice I've used square brackets there. I'm being very specifically using the definition from the literature for hazards, which is different to the general definition which you're used to, which could be a hazard is anything that has the potential to cause harm. And that's a very, very broad, very loose definition that's not really helpful. So STAMP introduces this definition of a hazard. So I'll just make it a bit easier to see on the screen. There we go. So from Professor Levison's second book, Engineering a Safer World, and the STPA handbook, page 17, the definition of hazard used in STAMP is distinct from other definitions. And I'll show you some other definitions in a minute. So essentially a hazard, square brackets, is a system state or set of conditions that that together with a particular set of worst case environmental conditions will lead to an accident or loss. So it's, conceptually, the hazard, the system state, is much closer to the actual harm, the loss, the outcome we're trying to avoid. And you could define it in the context of a system state or condition, or if it's appropriate for the particular thing that you're looking at, as an event or time limited. But typically it's a system state. So if we're talking about submarines and colliding with fishing vessels, the hazard is about the safe separation between those fishing vessels, regardless of what trajectories they're on. We have to maintain safe separation. So if we don't maintain safe separation between the submarine and another vessel, that is one of the hazards we're concerned with. Whereas in this particular accident, the hazard that actually occurred was about safe separation in terms of grounding or, shallow water, maintaining separation from conditions that would lead to grounding. Now, of course, I could do with refining that a little bit further, and I'm not here to do that tonight, but, that's something defining and refining hazards is a distinct skill in its own right. And it's not easy at the best of times, but trying to go from traditional hazard definitions to using STAMP and the definitions used in STAMP is a bit of a learning curve. And if you want help with that, of course, send me a message and we can have a conversation. Now, in terms of other definitions of hazard you might be familiar with, I'll just put it on the screen so you can see it a little bit better. Let's zoom in a bit more. There we go. So if you're familiar with the UK MOD DEFSTAN 00056, Part 1, Issue 7, so this defines a hazard as the potential to cause harm, e.g. a physical situation or state of a system, often following from some initiating event that may lead to an accident. So it's kind of similar, but significantly different. And it is about the potential to cause harm, whereas the definition in STAMP is very clear. If this system state occurs, you're going to get some harm. That's it. And so it gives you a much much clearer steer on what we should be concerned about from a safety engineering perspective. Then we've got the same DEF stand 0056 Part 1 Issue 8, so the latest version. And this says that a hazard is an item or an event or an activity or a situation with the potential to cause injury, ill health or death, damage to or loss of equipment or property, or damage to the environment. Essentially an intermediate state where potential for harm exists. So again, it's a bit more woolly. It's more defined than issue 7, but it's still a bit woolly when compared to the definition of a hazard used in STAMP. Then we've got the Department of Defence, MIL Standard 882E, Change 1. A hazard is a real or potential condition that could lead to an unplanned event or series of events, i.e. a mishap, resulting in death, injury, occupational illness, damage to or loss of equipment or property, or damage to the environment. So again, it's a different perspective on what is the system state we're trying to avoid or control. Now, of course, this one, because it is a defence standard, we've got to accept that sometimes there's military necessity where you're willing to accept damage or destruction or potentially injury or death of your military members of the military. So we have to keep in mind it's not a pure safety standard. This is military. We're not just trying to prevent all accidents, if you like. We are willing to accept higher states of risk. And then finally this one. So this is the Civil Air Transport SAE ARP Aerospace Recommended Practice 4761A, Civil Aircraft Systems and Equipment Guidelines. So this is used in all your large civil air transport aircraft, and this is where they define a hazard: a condition resulting from failures, external events, errors, or combination thereof where safety is potentially affected. Now, you'll notice, and you'll probably see from my other videos, that I bang on about safety is not just about failures, and STAMP is broader than just worrying about failures, because you could have a situation where the system has behaved as designed and that leads to an accident, and that's not a failure. Or when you start talking about complex software or AI, producing an output which is believably correct but then contributes to an accident. So this definition is much more narrow than the STAMP definition, and I suppose if you're using this definition, you're potentially missing out on identifying situations of dangerous successes that lead to an accident. You're blind to that side of the safety coin, if you like. So we define some hazards, we define some high-level safety constraints, and then we get into the modelling, the control structure modelling, which is what we're doing today. Now, what I was saying about the hazards involved in this is that there is the hazards associated with grounding the submarine or colliding with something, but then there's also the control of the fishing vessels and making sure they don't collide or get in the way of the submarine and vice versa. And then, of course, the range vessels themselves, so they have their own vessels to move things around and tow things around. So we want to make sure there's no collision or loss of safe separation there, or entanglement. You don't want them entangling with each other. Okay, so I've laboured that point enough. Are there any questions or anything? Let's just have a quick look at the chat. I'll have a drink while I'm at it. My mouse is not working. There we go. Thanks, Darren. Streaming okay on LinkedIn. Fantastic. Okay, well, if there's no other comments or questions, what we'll do is we'll continue. Everything still seems to be live. Great. Okay, so the implications of this were not fully considered in any plan. In the absence of the BWQ officer, it is the view of the service inquiry team that the most appropriate manning for this boat transfer should have, there we go everyone, ding ding ding, should have the navigating officer on the bridge, the second coxswain on the casing, and the TSO as the officer of watch below. Right, so that describes a completely different control structure to how it actually was on the day. Okay, so this second coxswain, I don't think I've seen that term before, so what we're going to do is we're going to grab one of these and we're going to add that detail to it. So what is it? The second coxswain. coxswain on the casing. Yeah, in the chat, if anybody knows what a second coxswain is or does, that would be interesting to know. Because I think that's going to be one of the challenges with this, because obviously I'm coming at it from a layperson's perspective, and the investigation report is not written with that audience in mind. It's written for the submarine community. So we'll just put that to one side. Okay, the Lieutenant Commander, whoever that is, doesn't say what role they were performing, stated to the SI team that he had never been south of the Crowlin Islands on the bridge in the dark before. So let's just jump back to the map. So there's the Crowlin Islands, you can see just there. So they've never been south of that position in the dark. Okay. The CO was unaware of this fact. Okay. In contrast, the navigating officer had completed a number of transfers in this area in the dark. It is the view of the service inquiry team that the navigation officer should have been on the bridge for the boat transfer. So again, there's some interesting questions there about who is responsible for defining the team, the control structure, and their positions and the roles allocated to them. Whoever that is, or whoever that group of people are, were they aware of these deficiencies? In this case, the CO said he was unaware. Okay, fair enough. But what would prompt them to ask those questions? What is the approach to planning the way the team does a particular, objective, particular mission, particular profile? How do they decide who the people are? Or is it literally just you do this, you do that, you do this, without considering, the implications of that? I don't know. I'm just sort of wondering. The CO's C orders. So, C orders. What we'll do is we'll have some of those over here. C orders. There's the standing orders. But then there's also the CO's C orders. There we go. Don't know what that is, don't know what the detail is, but it might be relevant, so we'll stick it over there. In fact, actually, what I might do... Yeah, no, that's fine, I'm going to carry on like that. COC orders provide no additional instructions on the conduct of boat transfers other than the time at which it was to commence. Okay, no additional instructions on the conduct of boat transfers. Now, it's kind of... You kind of expect that they should have some detailed instructions on how to do conduct of boat transfers. But is that normal practice? Would it be in the CO's C orders, or would it be in some other orders that we've not yet come across yet? I don't know, other than the time at which it was to commence. So is there an assumption that everyone knows how to do boat transfers? Is there an assumption that there's already a risk, assessment for it? I don't know. It is the view of the SI team that insufficient guidance and direction was provided in the C orders for this event. Okay. So what that is describing is, if we go to, let's just use this nice dotted line. So there's some CO C orders, and they go somewhere. We don't know where they go to in terms of the control structure, but let's just say it goes to everybody on the entire crew, and they have to read the entire thing and know everything that's inside there. I'm not sure if that's an appropriate assumption. I'd probably assume that this is broken into sections for particular roles or particular activities, and people only look at those when it's relevant to them, but I don't know, I'm just assuming. So they're saying there's not enough detail in there. Okay, so, well, why is that? Is it the CO that's supposed to write these orders themselves individually, or is it a selection of orders for submarines from somewhere else, and then the CO adds their own nuanced bits to it? Or how does this thing get created? What's the control structure around this? And then how does that find its way to influence different parts of the control structure? If it does, it might be one of those, folders full of information that nobody reads because it's not in a form that's appropriate or easy to digest. We're all human at the end of the day. We don't all want to read lots and lots of detail. It should be presented in a way that makes sense to us. Bridge preparations. On the morning of the incident, the submarine surfaced on the watch at 04:49. and commenced a surface passage to the boat transfer area. The CO was not present in the control room, presuming that was for the surfacing. The submarine was surfaced by the TASO, who remained as the officer of the watch below. The surfacing officer of the watch was the CBO. Can't remember what we said the CBO was. Did we have that in the control structure yesterday? CBO, there we go. There we go. That's one. Okay. Where are we? So the surfacing officer of the watch was the CBO. It took Lieutenant, whoever that is, took charge of the submarine. However, he is not platform endorsed, and therefore Lieutenant Commander X or Y remained in the control room to supervise him. Okay. Surfacing officer of the watch was the CBO. Lieutenant X took charge of the submarine, however, he is not platform endorsed and therefore remained in the CR to supervise him. I think I might be a bit stupid, it's not making sense to me. I know yesterday we said that the TASO remained below as the officer of the watch, and they were also supervising the officer of the watch. Why is that a P? Something's changed. I need to correct that. The officer of the watch. Oh, is it that they were both below and then that officer went above and the TASO stayed below? Maybe that's what it meant. Okay, I mean that's important, I think. Not platform endorsed. And the Lieutenant Commander remained in the CR to supervise him. That is important. Minimum qualifications for the officer of the watch surface are STCW NWC, platform endorsement, and CO's authorization. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, put it over here. So we've got three things. We've got number one, STCW NWC. We've got platform endorsement PE, and then we've got CO authorization. Okay, so there are three criteria. Don't worry about me putting in a box as though it's a control structure model, as though it's a controller. I'm going to change that later on. I just want to capture it while we think about it. Because somebody somewhere is making a decision about the competence of this individual and whether they pass the criteria. And it sounds like there's at least three different controllers involved in that. There's the CO themselves, and then there's whoever or whatever is involved in this acronym, I don't know what it is, and then the platform endorsement. So what does that mean? Is that a Navy thing, or is it a BAE Systems submarine manufacturer thing, or is it a combination of those things? Is it the naval training process for operations on submarines? I don't know. We need to, who are the controllers involved in this assessment and decision making. There we go. I can't spell who. That's it. Let's make that a different colour. Let's make it a blue. There we go. That'll do, won't it? Everyone's happy. Assessment. There we go. Let's chuck that over there somewhere. And what we will do is we will add an arrow. Don't worry about the colours too much. I'm just using them to remind me of things so that there's no sort of decision or judgment behind that. So officer of the watch. Right. So it is the view of the SI team that this requirement should be adhered to. Okay, so why was it not adhered to? What was the circumstances? Was this individual under training? Was there some kind of other things going on that meant that they had to step up and take control of the situation because there was no one else. Were they under training or coaching? I don't know. Rigging of the bridge commenced shortly after surfacing and was not complete until just minutes before the grounding. Okay. So there's a sort of question there about the change of the control structure during this particular sequence of events. So I'll just quickly go to this part. So as part of a cast accident analysis, one of the things we look at, one of the three parts of the analysis phase. So just to remind you, cast accident analysis has three parts to the analysis phase. So it has the physical process analysis. So this is looking at the physical system, the equipment and actuators and sensors, and if there's any contribution from those involved in an accident. Then we've got the controller analysis. So this is looking at the controllers themselves and their behaviors. And then the control structure analysis. So this is looking at the structure itself and how the controllers themselves interact with each other and how that structure changes over time. So if we just quickly jump to the structure analysis. So this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but this is the general topics that come from the literature and my experience. And of course, you might have suggestions for things to add to this, but this is a good starting point. So were there any issues with communication and coordination across this control structure? Clearly, from what we learned yesterday, yes, there were some issues there. Structure, architecture and interactions. What we're highlighting here is there were some changes to this structure, the architecture itself, in terms of who was doing what role in the control structure, where that role was physically located, and the capabilities of the various actuators and sensors, the equipment for those people in those particular locations. So in terms of dynamics and changes and evolution over time, this is quite a big theme for this particular accident by the look of it. So just generically, were there any product, service or system changes or evolution in that time? There was mention yesterday about there being some failures and equipment issues. Were there any issues with the environment, dynamics and changes, evolution, where you could say that they're in an area that they weren't expecting to be or weren't used to? Organisation and humans involved, including behaviour, perhaps complacency or perception changes. Were there any planned or unplanned or official changes? I think pretty much all of those things were involved so far in the description. But what I'm saying is if you have a control room and you have various people controlling the movement of the submarine, and then you are disrupting or changing that control structure and moving people around physically, changing the equipment available to them for sensors and actuators, and then also potentially changing their roles and responsibilities, it's sort of hardly surprising that something like this would happen. So, when we're designing these things, when we're designing or, doing risk assessments, thinking about how, something, a vessel like this is operated, we should be thinking about what that explicit human control structure part is like, and then how that can be weakened due to things like changes, as we've seen in this case. So let's just quickly check the chat, see if anybody's asked any questions. Excuse me. So Mark is there. Hi Mark, good to see you. A second coxswain on a British submarine is a senior chief petty officer, second class, who is responsible for steering and the safe navigation of the vessel. So they're very important. Todd Brackman, mission briefing. Thanks, Todd. Good to see you. And mission risk assessment. Thank you. Fantastic. Mark says, on a British submarine, an STCW NWC is a Royal Navy Navigational Watch Certificate that is considered equivalent to the Merchant Marine Certificate defined by the International STCW Convention. So that's probably collision at sea, collision regulations related. So yeah, fantastic. Thanks for that, Mark. I'll just go across and edit that little bit. Where is it? There it is, STCW. So this is the RN Navigational Watch Certificate. So it's quite important that then having that qualification and the training associated with it. So was this individual under training? Were they being qualified for that perhaps? So there's a question there how training is structured, how that is involved in safety related operations, the decisions involved. Because everyone says, working on the job and training on the job is the best thing ever. It is, But we have to recognise that, you know, a safe control structure has competent trained people within it. But if we're going to use that control structure and introduce people that are not trained and not supported, then we shouldn't be surprised we have accidents. So how do we control that? How do we make sure that those people are supported appropriately and that it doesn't undermine the safe behaviour of the control structure? Okay, so at approximately 0610 Zulu, when the CBO handed over to the TASO, I don't know if I'm saying the right acronyms properly, please don't beat me up. Hang on, TSO, that's different. That's not the same, is it? TSO. Is that, in the chat, is TASO and TSO, are they different roles, or is this just finger trouble, they've missed an A out? I think that, so that's a Lieutenant Commander, that's a Lieutenant Commander. A number of significant items were still, actually, I'm going to make a note of that, because that, is it a TASO or is it a TSO? Is it the same thing? I don't know. Let's just mark that up. I'll make it grey. There we go, nice grey. Don't know, we can figure that out later on. There we go, TASO. Right, a number of significant items were still not on the bridge, and the secondary navigation position flaps were still shut, clipped and moused, tie-wrapped. The items absent from the bridge were the handheld radio, VHF radio, and the bridge chart. And the secondary radar was not yet operational. So secondary radar, we didn't talk about that yesterday. We did talk about the charts and the radios. Where's the radio? There's the chart, there's the radios. And so we also needed radar. So just going to put there sensor, secondary radar, secondary radar, unavailable. I've spelled unavailable wrong. There we go, fantastic. Excuse me, right. It is the view of the SI team that the lack of these items all contributed to the grounding. Fantastic, okay, yeah. I think I would tend to agree with that, but why were they not available is the question. What was the control structure behind making those things available? And if they weren't available by a particular time, why wasn't other action taken? Why would it make sense not to do that? Use of the radar. The submarine's primary radar, radar 1009, was not used after surfacing. Okay, during the previous 24 hours it was emitting noise, and a command decision was made to limit its use and to preserve it to support dived operations in accordance with FPN 95. Okay, so let's just... why has it done that? Why does it do that? That's ridiculous. Sensor, secondary radar. I think I'm too fast with my fingers, that's what it is. Right, primary radar. Primary radar. And that was not used. Not used. Unavailable. There we go. So some important sensors were not available. Okay, and there was a command decision related to that. FPN 95. So I'm just going to make a note of that as well. I don't know what FPN 95 is, but I think it might be important. So we'll just highlight it anyway. If it's not important, we can chop it out of the control structure. No worries. Right, the radar defect was discussed at the O group, conducted on the 21st of October. So an O group. Lieutenant Commander was not present at this O group, but he stated in his evidence that he had been briefed that he could use the radar at any time he required it. At no stage did anyone request its use. To mitigate for this, the secondary radar was to be rigged. Okay, so O group. Don't know what that is. I suppose that that is a type of meeting held on board where decisions are made. I don't know who the makeup of that group is and the information available to them and the decisions that they made, and whether those decisions excuse me, might affect the conduct of this particular boat transfer, this particular navigation. I don't know. Again, just to sort of highlight from a practical point of view, when you're doing this yourself, when you're practicing doing this reading reports or you're doing it part of a real investigation, it's important to understand that there are certain roles involved in a conduct of an STPA or cast analysis. One of those is the role of the modeller, somebody who's putting the model, control structure model together, somebody who is the facilitator, who is the person who sort of referees people and moves the study in an appropriate direction, who identifies the kind of questions that need to be asked, and then of course facilitates talking with the various subject matter experts to answer those questions. Because I'm hoping you can see so far that you don't necessarily need to know the details of the particular, domain that you're looking at. I mean, it helps because you can build a control structure and ask logical questions based around building that control structure that can help point to questions that you wouldn't normally think to ask if you're an experienced person. It's the, what do they call it? The challenge with being an expert. You don't necessarily know what you don't, you know stuff tacitly, you don't necessarily know stuff explicitly, and so you might forget to ask some of the basic questions that a beginner, a layperson might ask, if that makes sense. Excuse me. So the secondary radar was to be rigged, but it wasn't yet available, so there was no radar, range finding or anything like that available to the crew to make decisions upon. And I don't know if the radar systems can give warnings for proximity to, the land or other objects. I don't know if that's the case. And I don't know, of course, if that information is blended with the radar and the plot for them to realise how close they are to shallow water. I don't know if that's the case. They might do, they might not, I don't know. So let's have a look. It is a cumbersome task to rig the radar, and something the crew are not overly familiar with. Right, here we go then. That's interesting context, I think. So it's a cumbersome task and they're not overly familiar with it. Okay. So there's a question there for the control structure of the design and operation of that secondary radar. Why is it a cumbersome task? And why are the crew not familiar with it? Is there something that, in learning from this particular incident, before entering into, a boat transfer area or into the particular context that they did on that particular day, are there not certain steps or stages they need to go through to make sure that they are equipped and ready to perform the tasks that they are? And if they're not overly familiar with it, then perhaps they need to be drilled and practiced on that. Again, I don't know the context. There may be some really genuine reasons why they don't and why they weren't. I'm not trying to criticise individuals. On this occasion, it was not available in too late. So if we were talking about our, going back to our basics of the control structure model, the control loop, the availability of radar feedback information was too late for that to be able to inform the beliefs and decisions of the controllers involved. Okay. So the officer of the watch remembers seeing the picture on the something blank shortly after he gave the order to come to starboard at 0631, only minutes before the grounding. So I'm presuming that's radar picture on a particular display or some kind of system, I don't know. Only minutes before the grounding. It is the view of the SI team that the whatever that is radar is inferior to radar 1009, but would have supported the navigation requirements if used on the morning of the 22nd of October. So the way this is written, it sounds like either there was 2 radars or 3 radars. I'm not sure. I'm not going to assume or presume. But it sounds like the primary radar, or the secondary radar, is not as good as the primary radar. Presuming that's what they say, primary. I'm talking air traffic control language, sorry. So this other radar is inferior to this one. but would have supported the navigation requirements if it was used on the morning. Okay, well, yeah, fine, great, okay, but that's not what happened in the accident. So why did it make sense for them not to use the primary radar, the other radar? It doesn't say. At no stage did anyone request its use. Okay. Well, why did they not do that? Why did it make sense not to do that? What was their beliefs? So maybe this person, this witness, if that is the officer of the watch on the surface, then what was their mental model about the other radar, the primary radar? That seems really confusing, that does, because this radar here, it says that that's the primary radar. And then this one here, I'm presuming that's the secondary radar. Anyway, yeah, that's just detail. There's apparently two radars. Bridge chart. The absence of the bridge chart until 0624 also played a significant role in the grounding. The POOW was reporting the submarine's position to the officer of the watch, following each fix by cross-reference it to the boat transfer grid box. The absence of the bridge chart meant that the officer of the watch was unable to determine his position relative to danger. Okay, by his own admission, he had not established any tripwires, that's interesting, to mitigate against impending danger. Okay, so why was that? Why did it make sense for him not to do that? You know, is it that this person is not, you know, doesn't have these minimum qualifications? You know, were they in the first days of their training, perhaps? You know, maybe they didn't know that stuff was needed. And so, you know, there's a question there over the control structure around that individual and the support that they necessarily would need. Although the chart did finally make it to the bridge, this was deemed too late, and from his evidence it is concluded that the officer of the watch did not have any meaningful time to refer to it as events unfolded around him. Okay. Let's just have a quick drink and look at the chat again. So thanks, Mark. You've been really, really helpful. I really appreciate that. On a British submarine, a TSO is a tactical systems operator. Okay, so that is a distinctly different role to TSO, tactical systems officer. That is a distinctly different role to the tactical and sonar officer by the sound of it. So are they related? Don't know, not sure. But it sounds distinct. Now, it could be that the roles that those individuals perform is overlap. There might be some overlapping in the roles and responsibilities between the two. And that's why it's really important when you're building a control structure to think about the functional abstraction of that controller itself and the roles and responsibilities allocated to it versus the actual people involved and their job titles. Because quite often you can have a job title that's got 10 hats on their head, and those hats can be passed around depending on what happens. You know, they could be just literally passed around, or it could take time for people to take those hats from each other, maybe. So thanks for that, Mark. That's fantastic. The role is part of the fighting or tactical department of the submarine rather than the engineering section. FPN 95 procedure is a British submarine is a standing order related to the preservation and limited use of the main radar during certain operations. Yeah, absolutely. So that's important. That's important to stealth and things like that. You don't want to go emitting lots of electromagnetic radiation so the enemy can detect it. So FPN 95 standing order, main radar use. Fantastic. Brilliant. Excuse me. Yeah, because you don't want to inadvertently blast the area with radar and people pick you up. That's not good. We're supposed to be stealthy. Okay, so that's good. Right, fantastic. Is there anything else in the chat? Interesting perspective. In aviation, military in particular, every mission is briefed to the ones performing the mission tasks. Thanks, Todd. Yeah, there is a mindset difference between maritime and air, certainly, and then between military and civilian. And my sort of experience with submarine operations is incredibly limited, so I can't sort of add detail. But if you're thinking about the control of an aircraft and the trajectory of the aircraft, typically you've got the captain and the first officer, and that's pretty much it. You might have, if you're talking about a military aircraft such as 15 odd years ago, I worked, did some safety work on the Royal Air Force Nimrod maritime reconnaissance and attack aircraft. And that had a pilot and co-pilot in the front. They had, on the earlier Nimrods, the MR2s, the R1s, they had a flight engineer. And then the MRA4, the later one that was eventually cut up, that one just had a pilot and co-pilot. And then in the back, they had a tactical coordinator, a TACO, and then a navigator. And then either of those were, depending on the mission context, they were the commander of the aircraft. So you had a very different control structure on board that type of aircraft than you would on, a passenger jet. And again, if you're talking about military fast jets, single seats or dual seats, you've got different control structures. And then if you think about airborne early warning and control, the AWACS planes and the stuff that they do, they're coordinating multiple aircraft and doing different missions and how to coordinate those. So it gets quite complex quite quickly. But this is, as I say, bang on a lot. This is why STAMP is so powerful for these kinds of systems, because the issues are with the control structure, with the command structure. And what this approach does is force you to make that explicit so you can start to understand how that control structure evolves during your mission, during normal conditions, but also abnormal and emergency or degraded conditions. So you can make that explicit. That's one of the powers of this method. But of course, when you're starting out, it can be quite overwhelming because you're making stuff, you're looking at things you wouldn't necessarily normally look at, but also you're making things explicit that, you might find things that have been apparently fine for many, many years. And when you start looking at it through the lens of STAMP, you start to realise, actually, under these specific conditions, circumstances, our control structure is quite fragile. And it only takes a small disturbance to result in an accident. Or a collection of many small, independently not big issues, but when they come together and you look at it through the lens of an overall control structure, you can find some really obvious safety issues that are not apparent at the time. So yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Todd. So if someone doesn't understand a task, they would speak up. Yeah, I mean, speaking up is an important cultural thing, but again, that can be challenging in certain circumstances. And obviously, I don't know the culture or behaviour of this particular control structure. Okay, so VHF radio. So we mentioned that, didn't we? There was two VHF radios. There was the handheld, and then there was the other one, Submarine's communications equipment. Yeah. Okay. So let's have a look at that. So the absence of the VHF radio, so that was missing. Excuse me, meant that the officer of the watch could not communicate directly to the MV Omar from the bridge. At no stage was the C control room or WT office. Not sure what WT office is, so I don't think it's watertight, is it? I don't know. Weapons relate, I don't know. Directed to communicate with the Omar using the VHF radio. So there's a concept of the control room and the WT office. So let's just have let's put control room and WT office. So these are, I'm going to make these boxes bigger and make the writing, hang on, what size was the writing? 25. Let's make the writing 20, there we go, 24, that'll do. And we'll make the writing up to the, excuse me, left and top. I'm going to make these a nice shade of light blue. I'm just going to make them a bit bigger. Now, the reason I'm doing that at this stage is because I'm starting to think about the logical groupings of these controllers and where they, in this case, are physically conceptually located. So there'll be some controllers in the control room, there'll be some controllers in the WT office, whatever that is. I don't yet know enough about, from what I've read in the report, to say which are in the control room and which are in the WT office. I think the officer of the watch below, I think they were kind of in that location, so let's just put them there, stretch it a little bit, there we go. There we go, so I'm just starting to group these things together. I don't think the divers were in the control room, so we'll just move them out the way. Let's move that out the way. There we go, and then the WT office, I don't know what that is all about, so we'll put that out the way. Yeah, there we go. Okay, let's keep moving. Are there any other? Here we go. Mark, thanks, Mark. You're a godsend. Thank you. A WT office on a British submarine is the wireless telegraph office, the communications hub of the vessel. Fantastic. So that is a very important location. Excuse me. WT office. There we go. Fantastic. So they are important as well. There'll be certain people in there doing certain things with equipment, communications equipment. Don't know who they are at this moment. In fact, I'll put it over there. That'd probably make better sense to have it there. Put those over there. There we go. That's it. Starting to take shape, everybody. You know, just to highlight, it is a creative process. It does take time. It is iterative. It will look a mess. And what we're trying to do is just get the information out, and then we can refine it and make it look pretty later on. That's if we can, because sometimes they can be ugly, these control structures. Generally trying to make them look nice, because obviously something that is good, easy on the eye, you know, is lined up properly and arranged properly, you know, clearly, it's easier for people to look at and understand. If it's a bit sort of skew whiff and a bit messy, that actually affects the ability to communicate information. So it's always important to have an eye on the design and shape of these things, but not go too crazy while you're building it. Just assume it's going to get messy and then tidy it up and clean it up later on. And of course, think about the audience for it, because you don't want to, you don't want a massive control structure with all kinds of different things on it. If you're just going to introduce the basic concepts to somebody in leadership, for example, they don't necessarily need to see the detail. And so think about the control structure model and the audience you're going to present it to separately from creating a model for you to do the analysis on. You know, models for communication, models for analysis. So yeah, VHF radio. The absence of the VHF radio meant the officer of the watch could not communicate directly to the MV OMAR from the bridge. At no stage was the CR control room or the wireless telegraph office directed to communicate with the OMAR using the CR VHF radio or the weapon. I keep wanting to say weapon something else, sorry. Wireless telegraph office set. So there's a CR VHF radio and there's a WT office radio, apparently. Excuse me, according to this. So let's just... so let's put CR radio. I wish it had stopped doing that, deleting everything in the box. That's really annoying. WT office radio. There we go. I'm just sticking these here in the corner just as a place for later on. I'm going to move them around. I'm not going to leave them there. In fact, actually, what I could do is I could put these two down here. So I'll put a wireless... excuse me, telegraph office in there, and I'll stick this one in the control room in the corner. In fact, I'll stick it down there because it's an actuator or a sensor. It's not a controller in its own right. Okay, what else have we got? So early communication with the MV OMAR would have allowed the officer of the watch to request OMAR to adjust its course and provide him with the option to turn to port into safe water and at an earlier position. So there is this other vessel floating around, and I don't know what MV OMAR looks like. Is it a big vessel? What does it look like? Images, MV OMAR. There you go, that's what it... Oh, that's an SD OMAR. Is that the same one? Maybe. Don't know. Anyway, slight divergence there. Would have allowed the officer watch to request the OMAR to adjust its course and provide him the option to turn to port into safe water at an earlier position. There is no restriction on him turning to starboard at any time. by the officer of the watch not considering the option of an earlier turn to star, but it is the view of the SI team that the lack of early communications with the OMAR contributed to the grounding. Again, I don't really think that's a very fair thing to say, because it's kind of, with hindsight, well, you could have done this, or you could have done that. And the fact you didn't do that means that, it's your fault, and that's not helpful at all. Let's explore the accident as it was, as the facts are, as they're apparent, instead of trying to second guess things. It's just, I'm not particularly keen on that. But again, this is a report from 15 years ago, so I'd like to presume the reports that we're creating nowadays, the inquiries we're doing nowadays, are far less hindsight biasy. Okay, so the secondary navigation position. So we spoke about that yesterday. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one and I'm going to put it there, and I'm going to call it the secondary navigation position. Position. I could have sworn I'd written that. I think this was it, wasn't it? Was that SNP yesterday? I'll have to replay the video and figure it out. So this is SNP. So this is a physical location. So when you're building your control structure models, it is, like I said earlier on, it is helpful to try and group things together, functions together, to make it make sense to you as the modeler, the analyst, but also to the audience that you're going to present these things to later on. So if you can group these controllers by their physical location, that can help present a picture, but likewise if you can group them by similar functions, that can also help. So yeah, secondary navigation position. Yeah, okay, where are we? So the SMP flaps were still shut and clipped when the XO arrived in the back of the fin at 0621. It took him a finite time, 5 minutes, to remove the tie wraps and unclip the 8 clips per flap before he was in position. It was a further 2 to 3 minutes before he gained his night vision, and for him to recognise that the submarine was much closer to the land than he had ever seen it for a boat transfer. Much closer. So this is the point where this person's mental model beliefs are like, ooh, actually, we're a bit closer to land than perhaps we should be. It is the view of the SI teams that this delay prevented any command supervision of the officer of the watch until it was too late. Okay. So command supervision then, that is a type of controller, I'd like to say. So I'm gonna include it just so we can talk about it later on. So let's have command supervision. What does that mean and look like, and who is actually involved in that? So again, I'm gonna make the writing, put it up the top, make it a bit smaller, make it bold, underline it a little bit. I'm going to make the background, instead of light blue, I'm going to make it violet. There we go, some pretty colours. So there needs to be some command supervision over the officer of the watch. So let's just move that back a little bit. Let's just stretch it a little bit like that. There we go. It's looking like a bit of a mess, but that's fine. That's what we want. Let's just try and grab some of these controllers and move them out of the way a little bit. Let's not take that or that. No, hang on. We don't want that. Yeah, there we go. So let's move that down a little bit. There we go. So we've got some more space. Let's move all of this up a bit. So we've got some space. Let's move this up. Let's move this stuff as well. Let's move that up a little bit. Right, there we go. Yeah, these boxes that have got a P in, for some reason when you're working with Miro, if you're too fast with your fingers, it blanks out whatever's in there. So I'm going to have to go back and watch the recording from yesterday and fix that. So just please forgive that. So command supervision of the officer of the watch until it was too late. Oh, hang on a minute. So officer of the watch, command supervision then. So let's just stretch that out, move that over there. This was the, where is it? The XO. So the XO was the person up there, and they were in the secondary navigation position. So we'll just drag this over here. We'll bring the XO to the front. We'll stick them in there like that. Don't worry that it looks like a mess. It's all right. Don't worry. We'll make it look better later on. There we go. The reason the flaps were not lowered was explained by the XO in his evidence. The submarine had been noise ranging, and it was important that the fin was tight and rattle free, hence all clips were shut and moused. During previous boat transfers, the flaps were already lowered, but they were overlooked on the morning of the incident. Okay, so we're talking about the flaps in the secondary navigation position. So let's just put this over here, flaps. So who or what is in control of the flaps? There we go. Let's put a little arrow between there and there. We might not need to go into that level of detail. I think it's probably a trivial thing, but let's just put it over there. Why were the flaps not open and closed? It kind of explains it there. But again, this is this is sort of a consequence. This is a contributor to the reason why there was a delay. It's not a direct contributor to the reason there was an accident, but it is an influence that we might want to consider, later on. Okay, so there we go. It was important that the fin was tight. Yeah, okay. During previous boat transfers, the flaps were already lowered, but they were overlooked on the morning of the incident. Okay, so why was that? Why was it left to the XO to do that? Is that the XO's normal job, or is it someone else's role and responsibility? If it is, who was that other person or the team member, group? Bridge repeat. HMS Astute is fitted permanently rigged with bridge repeat, which displays helm, log speed and engine revolutions. Okay, so bridge repeat. A fault in the display. God, here we go. A fault in the display prevented the engine revs from being read. I mean, that might be relevant, it might not. I don't know. I don't think it does based on what's already been said, but let's include the bridge repeat in there then. So this is... so let's put bridge. Is it bridge? There we go, bridge at the top of the fin. There we go. And we have an type of feedback. So let's put feedback. What was it called? It was called a bridge repeat, which actually, let's just drag this over here so it's easier to think about. BRIDG repeat, and that includes helm, log speed and engine revs. There we go. Make that a bit smaller. There we go. Let's stick that over there. And what does it say? There's an issue with the engine revs. I mean, it might not be relevant. I don't know. But let's just make it red. There we go. And I'll underline it. I should remember if it's. There we go. There we go. Engine revs. Something wrong with it. Great. A fault. Yeah. Whilst this would have given. See. Notice the language. Everybody would have given the officer of the watch confirmation that engine orders were being implemented. Okay, so that's interesting. So it did not contribute to the grounding. Well, that's interesting because it provides important feedback. So if... let's just get a black arrow. There we go. That'll do. And it's got some words on it. So there's feedback there about... So there's implied feedback confirming, showing the effect of this controller's control actions or non-effect. So if you provide a control action and you have no direct feedback to know whether that's been implemented or not, these other indirect feedbacks might be important. If you say, slow the revs, reduce the revs, and then you don't see that the revs have been reduced, and you can't feel it or get any other kind of feedback that indicates that that's happened, that you have that feedback that shows that there's no change, that updates the mental model, the beliefs of that controller, so they can then follow up with a further querying control action or querying for feedback. So whilst it says it did not contribute to the grounding, it is part of the feedback loop. And so if they had realised or detected that their control actions had not been fulfilled, they might have acted earlier and taken an alternate course of action. So I'm not sure I'd agree. I mean, I'm not an expert, so I don't know, but it just sounds like that the inadequacy of that feedback did not contribute to the grounding. I don't know. I think that maybe there is a bit of contribution, perhaps minor. I don't know. What do you thought? What are your thoughts in the comments? Type in the chat what your thoughts are, and I'll just have another quick drink. Yeah, thanks, Mark. Location light fin, fantastic. Yeah, so bridge fin, there we go. That's good. So I suppose they're both on the fin. Excuse me. And they're just on the bridge. So I could have an extra box just to emphasise that. But that's fine. I'll make it look pretty later on. It's not a huge deal at the moment. So bridge communications then. There we go. The surfacing officer of the watch, CBO Lieutenant Blah, was experiencing some bridge communication difficulties and asked for the ICS audio panel box to be changed. The original watertight unit had leaked and been replaced by a standard unit, which also had a fault. Okay, so this is the ICS audio. Right, let's just take this, put it over here. Right, what are we talking about here? So bridge communications. And that is the, let's make that a bit smaller. I can't see, there we go, bridge communications. So we've got an ICS audio panel box, and there's a watertight version. Normal version. And they both had faults. So let's mark that as red and an underline so that I remember there's an issue with it. There we go. Why can't I go smaller than... Anyway, there we go, that'll do. Let's make the box a bit wider. The officer of the watch directed that the original watertight unit, which had been dried out, should be used, which required replacement of the fitted unit. Okay. Fitting the watertight unit added considerable delay to the rigging of the bridge, and it still exhibited faults. Faults in the internal communication system. There we go, that's it. Internal communication system, ICS, audio panel, had resulted in the SCOO team dialing up a conference call to enable the required personnel to communicate. Okay. This was a convoluted process and was one of the delays in the restoration of communication between the bridge and the control room. Oh, dearie me. Delays in the restoration of communications between the bridge and the control room. The workaround solution did not include the CO's cabin. Oh dear. And prevented him from monitoring the net. The SI team questioned the use of the voice pipe as a secondary communications path. It was stated that by the officer of the watch below that it was totally ineffective and as a result was never used. It is the view of the SI team that defects and shortcomings of the internal communication system were a causal factor in the grounding. Yes, I would absolutely agree with that. That's really interesting. Okay, so let's just stretch this out then. So there's the bridge communications, internal communication system audio panel, and then there is this thing called a conference call. Where is it? Voice pipe. Voice pipe secondary communications. Okay. I don't know enough. I'd need a subject matter expert to add some detail about that. But essentially what we're talking about is these two, these lines here, these control actions to the helmsman. I'm presuming that they are in the control room. So let's just put those there like that. We'll tidy it up later on. Actually, yeah, that's right. Yeah, so helm line with com, is it? So those control actions come through the control. What I'll do is I'll make this a communications layer. So this is a bit of a modelling cheat, to be honest. So because that is not a controller in the conventional sense, but I include them. If you've seen my Tenerife disaster video, you'll notice I've used that and other air traffic related case studies. I'll include a block that's specifically communications, and it's just to sort of emphasise that block, it could be made of many different technologies, data links, radios, all kind of weird and wonderful things. But that communications layer is critical in that control structure. And if there's anything wrong with it or it's undermined for whatever reason, it effectively breaks your control structure, which almost guarantees you're going to have some problems, if not accidents. So let's just make this block nice and big. I'll stick those in there. We'll stick the stanophone in there. There we go. What was the other one? The helm line and the WIFCOM, whatever that is, we'll stick that in there. And then we can tidy it up later on when we know a bit more information. Now, obviously, because I'm working on this case study on my own, and I don't have the subject matter experts around me, apart from everybody kindly on the webinar, on this live stream, I might not be able to clarify that part of the model and add detail to it. I might not be able to make it look clear because I don't have the knowledge or information available to me, but I know that it's a contributor in some shape or form. So I'll chuck that in there, comms layer. What I'll do is I'll quickly just move this control loop like this so you can see, and let's just drag that up there, put that to there, put this to here. There we go. That's it. That's fine. Oh yeah, actually, yeah. So let's just talk about that for a second. So they commanded slow astern revolutions 30, and that information via the bridge repeat engine revs was not available. So if they had that information, that might have affected their decision making, their mental model, and prompted them to act sooner. So that the investigation report says that that's not a big issue. It did not contribute to the grounding. I'm not sure. I think there's an element of contributory aspects to it. Okay, so it was stated by the officer watch below that it was totally ineffective and as a result was never used. It is the view of the SI team that the defects and shortcomings of the internal communication system were a causal factor in the grounding. Yes, I completely agree with that. So we've got a comment there from James. Hi James, good to see you. Thanks for coming. In hindsight, that feedback might have shown that his astern order had not been understood correctly. Yes, absolutely. Fantastic. And having that state of knowledge available may have prompted that person to act faster. But again, I don't want to postulate too much. So yeah, fantastic, James. Thanks for pointing that out. Okay, where are we going? So actions by the officer of the watch. Prior to going to the bridge, Lieutenant Commander Blah looked at the chart. So his state of knowledge was updated by looking at the chart, presumably. He was informed that the submarine was running approximately 5 minutes late for the boat transfer rendezvous. He did not put a fix on the chart and provided no instructions to the POOW as to how he intended to manoeuvre or position the submarine for the transfer. Okay. He did not provide any instructions to the POOW on how he wished the submarine to be fixed. So that's configured, presumably. Nor did he provide the instruction on the use of the starboard optronics mast for fixing or monitoring of clearing bearings. So POOW is, where are they? There we go, Petty Officer of the Watch. So there is some actuators and sensors there, which was the optronics. So let's have a look. Optronics. So we'll put starboard optronics mast. So let's just minimize that. Let's put a line under it. Starboard optronics mast for fixing or monitoring of clearing bearings. Furthermore, he did not question why the echo sounder paper trace was not running. Okay, so that's a sensor. The optronics mast, I'm just going to assume it's a sensor feedback. I'm not going to assume there's any actuation capabilities on that. I don't know. So this is the echo sounder paper trace. Was not running. Okay. The Astute class SOs draft. So standing orders, presumably. So let's just quickly. Why is my mouse? Oh, there we go. So Astute standing orders. Where are they? There we go. Astute standing orders, but they were draft. Okay. Interesting. So there's questions there over. Not necessarily for this accident, but more broadly, you know, documentation and standing orders and how they are controlled, configured. How do you make sure that they are the right ones and that we don't inadvertently have, you know, drafts or intermediate versions that are not appropriate? How do we control that? You know, that might seem like a paperwork exercise, but I'm hoping you're starting to see, hang on a minute, you know, if the standing orders are not right or they're draft or whatever, you know, nobody has them available to them or they're too difficult to access, that can actually undermine the safety of the control structure, you know. Yeah, so there's standing orders, we talked about that. States that the echo sounder should have been running as the submarine was in 1 mile of land. Okay, that's interesting. But it wasn't running. Why is it not running? So the echo sounder, let's put that. Where's the submarine? There's the submarine layer. Let's line it up there. Why not? So the echo sounders were not working. So let's just make that red text. And it's echo sounder was not working, even though it was required to be working. The standing orders. So let's just go up here. Standing orders. Echo sounder use within 1 mile. So that's an interesting topic. I mean, this is a specific, very detailed part. So let's just zooming in too fast. There we go. So echo sounder use. This limitation, does this go to the petty officer of the watch, I wonder? Were they supposed to do that? Did they know to do that? Did they not do that because there was some other issue going on? We don't know yet, but let's stick it in because it might be relevant, it might not later on. States the echo sounder should have been running as the submarine was in 1 mile of land. The handover was not conducted in accordance with the SOPs. So and it is the view of the SI team that this resulted in the officer watch proceeding to the bridge without sufficient situational awareness or an understanding of the plan. This is assessed to be a causal factor to the ground. Yeah, absolutely. So situational awareness, SA, and an understanding of the plan. Again, there needs to be more to this. I think there's a lot more going on here that we need to understand. Because it kind of says, well, this is what happened, but not, well, why was that? Why did it make sense? And of course, we've got, these other sections to go, so let's keep going. So the navigating officer informed the SI team that as a general rule, the generic plan for boat transfers, is that documented? Is that a common understanding, a common mental model amongst the team? Is that written down? It's not in the CO's orders mentioned earlier on. Was to enter the inked-in boat transfer grid and reduce speed to X, conduct a turn, port starboard, put the wind at red 90. I think somebody said yesterday that's port, so left-hand side, not green starboard. Red 90. And then stop and wait for the arrival of the transfer vessel, the MV Omar. The preferred method of transfer was the astute to place the wind on the port beam and conduct the transfer on the submarine starboard side. Had this plan been followed, it is the view of the SI team that the grounding would have been avoided. Okay, well, why then? When astute entered the boat transfer grid at 0612, no direction was given to reduce speed until the fixed report 0619. So that's like 7 minutes. At this point, the officer of the watch was requested by the PWO to reduce speed and alter course to the north. The officer stated that he could not turn. So let's just go back to here then. So the officer of the watch and the petty officer. So there's a petty officer talking. There we go. So the petty officer of the watch is talking through communications to the officer of the watch, asking them to turn to the north, and they're saying no, could not turn to the north. Could not turn to port at this time because of the position of Omar, and did not consider the option of turning to starboard. So the position of Omar is affecting the decision making. So we've got MV Omar there, that's the other vessel. So we'll just make that a bit thicker. Let's make it a grey colour. There we go, it's a vessel. Okay, it's not clear whether Omar was underway or stopped, with no bridge VHF radio. The officer watch could not liaise with Omar to resolve the situation. However, the control room and wireless telegraph office VHS radios were available for this purpose. It is the view of the SI team that any situational awareness Lieutenant Commander Blah had when he arrived on the bridge was now rapidly deserting him due to the lack of either radar, a chart, or previous experience in this area. His decision not to alter course to the north when first directed by the petty officer of the watch, or at the earliest opportunity thereafter, or to seek an alternative means to communicate with Omar to resolve the situation was now critical to the final outcome. It is the view of the SI team that as the submarine entered box Golf 6 at the edge of the boat transfer grid, either the officer watch below or the PWW should have called the CO. Should have. There was now considerable doubt about the intentions of the officer of the watch and his awareness of the submarine's proximity to danger on ship's head. The submarine was propelling ahead at, still steering course 130 and heading directly towards the 15-metre limiting danger line. Okay, so let's just go back over here. So the officer of the watch is there, look. And we've got the petty officer of the watch there. And they together, Let's just put that over there. Casing party, well, they're not in the control room, so we'll just put them out of the way for a minute. Tactical sonar officer, officer of the watch, tactical. Yeah, so there's kind of an expectation there that these two would shout out to the officer of the watch to actually make some changes. So why didn't they do that? Is that to do with the communications issues? Okay, so at 0632, the submarine speed was by PMS. I think PMS is Platform Management System, something like that. So let's just stick that in there. So PMS, Platform Management System, PMS. Management. There we go. So that provides information about submarine speed. From reconstruction by the SI team, the submarine had 3 cables of safe water in front at 0627. The officer of the watch stated that he was concerned about snagging some fishing floats on his port bow, so that's why he couldn't turn port. Well, it's 2 things. So it's the presence of MV Omar, and then the presence of fishing floats. So there's 2 things there. Fishing floats. You might be wondering, Simon, why are you adding fishing floats to it? Well, the question is always, what is the... Well, let's just go back to... What is the jigsaw puzzle that we're interested in? And it looks like it might be interesting to start with, or actually it's irrelevant, it doesn't matter. But what I'm trying to get into your mind is when you're thinking about these things, always think about what is the jigsaw piece? What is the control loop related to this thing that I'm looking at or thinking about? So in the case of the fishing floats, well, no, let's say the MV Omar, the vessel itself. We know the vessel is, it's under some kind of control from the crew on board. And so the position of that vessel and the way it's behaving is a representation of what their controller is doing and the decisions they're making. In terms of the fishing floats, that they exist in that location, some controller of some description has made a decision to put them there. Now, they may be there genuinely, they're supposed to be there, or they might be, maybe they're broken off and they're floating away, or maybe someone's put them in the wrong place. Now, that might not necessarily directly contribute to this accident, but it certainly influenced, apparently, the decision-making of the commander, the lieutenant commander, the officer of the watch. So, maybe from an avenue of inquiry, who or what is involved in those fishing floats? Should they be there? Should they be there in the future? Perhaps that needs to be added to the maps, the charts. I don't know. I'm just trying to stretch your mind about the concept of these control loops. And inadequate control. Is it adequately controlled or not? Excuse me. So let's have a look. It was the CO's assessment based on the handling characteristics of Astute that bowled astern revs 50 RPM at this time, or an immediate turn using full rudder would have kept the submarine safe. Based on his knowledge. So knowledge is your beliefs, your mental models about the control process, the behaviour of the submarine. That bold astern revs at this time or an immediate turn using full rudder would have kept the submarine safe. Okay. Thinking about things through the lens of the control structure model, if your belief, if you're the, let's just use this one. So you're the controller, you decide the movement, you decide what control actions to provide to control the movement of the submarine, and your beliefs are that, in this context, the behaviour of the submarine, if we do full revs, 50 RPM, whatever it was, or we turn full rudder starboard, we should be okay. Did those beliefs, did that decision actually consider the rest of the control structure between them making a decision and issuing a control action, and that control action actually been carried out, and whether there was any potential for any issues, such as delays because the communication system's not working properly. So between that controller and the movement of the vessel, in this sort of control actions here, this control path, there's so many different players, so many different people, equipment, communications and everything else that induce some kind of delay to the issuance and carrying out of that control action. So if that person, that controller, does not anticipate that and does not have enough time for their control action to actually have a real world effect, of course that is a contributory control action. And it shows that their beliefs, their understanding and their decision making were inadequate because they'd not taken account of that lag in the control loop. Okay, so where were we? Let's have a look. So we're sort of a page from the end. I'm just looking at the clock. It's like 20 to 8 and we've still got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pages to go. So I'm just wondering whether we should get to the end of this section and then reconvene tomorrow and then smash through the rest of it. Type in the chat, let me know if you're up for another live stream tomorrow. Actually, let's just check the chat because I'm chatting away. Hi James, yeah, thanks for that. The CEO wasn't present at the time, so that belief must be in hindsight when interviewed. Yeah, of course. So when you're interviewing people in post-accident, post-event, it's important to understand that you as an investigator doing an interview and collecting information, and then how you represent that in your stamp-based analysis, your cast. You have to be mindful about, well, what was the beliefs and mental models of the individual at the point in time, and then how are they remembering it and how are they presenting it to you? Because one of the things about doing investigations is when you ask people questions and the way that you ask those questions can actually stomp all over their memories and actually cause them to remember things that didn't actually happen. And depending how many times they've repeated either to themselves or to other people their understanding of what happened, they can actually change their beliefs, change their memories. And so that's why it's incredibly important whenever an incident or accident occurs that either the investigators or the people involved actually capture their thoughts, their remembering, preferably on video with good audio, and so that they can get that out of their head and then avoid trying to talk too much about it with too many different people. Because obviously the more times you talk about it, you start to rationalize the story, the narrative, to make it easy to communicate, and actually you can start to change your memory, your beliefs about what's actually happened. It's quite challenging. There we go. So we've got Mark, reconvene tomorrow. Fantastic, Mark. Great. Okay, well, we'll keep going to this and then we'll call it a day. Excuse me. Right. So the SR team are of the view the officer of the watch had a weak knowledge of the surface handling characteristics. A weak knowledge, so that's beliefs, that's mental models of the surface handling characteristics of Astute, and by this stage still had no appreciation of the proximity to the danger. Yeah, okay, I mean that's fair enough, but I'd argue it's not just about the surface handling of the submarine, it's having an appreciation of the control structure below that individual and how that control structure can contribute to those control actions not being carried out or not being carried out timely enough to have have an impact. Excuse me. So characteristics of Astute by this stage still had no appreciation of the proximity to danger. At 0628, so this is before 32, the submarine commenced propelling slow astern. The submarine speed at the time was whatever it was. Lieutenant Commander X states he ordered slow astern 30 revs. The submarine was obeying telegraphs in surfaced mode, and the order that was actually executed was slow astern. This was the officer of the watch intention. If he had wanted to achieve 30 revs astern, the correct order he should have given was to order half astern revolutions 30. Neither the SCOOW or the helmsman requested further clarification whether the officer of the watch required slow or half astern. Under interview, neither could actually recall any astern order. An examination of the PMS data shows that only were ever applied at 0628. It is the view of the service inquiry that given the proximity of the danger, had the TSO given the order half astern revolutions 30, the grounding would have been avoided. Okay, so so that is the officer of the watch, the SCOOW, and the helmsman. So where have we got the helmsman? There we go, there's a helmsman, everybody. So let's move them up there. So there's some communication and coordination between those individuals. And then they mentioned, what was it, the telegraphs. Where is it? Telegraphs. So the telegraphs then, I don't know if I know enough about telegraphs to be able to talk about them, but let's just put telegraphs in there, because if I understand correctly, and please correct me in the chat if I'm completely talking nonsense, but the telegraph is essentially an ability for the people on the top, the controllers at the top, to provide a control action down to the people who actually, change the speed and direction of the vessel, the boat. And it's an ability to provide feedback that the control action has been received and enacted. And I don't know how that is manifested on the submarine. I don't know how that's done. So I'm going to include that there, and I'm going to have a think about it. I don't know enough at this stage. I'm going to have to go and research a little bit, I think. Okay, so it was at this time that a failure in the comms system occurred between the officer of the watch and ship control, which resulted in delay of approximately 2 minutes in passing this order. So that's your delayed control action. If I just quickly zoom to, here we go everybody, so control actions, types of control actions. We're talking about timing there. So there was a delay of 2 minutes approximately. There we go, so that's, unsafe control action, contributory control action we're talking about. When it says ship control as well, I'm not sure I understand that term. It doesn't kind of make sense. Is it saying that these people are ship control? Is that what that means? I don't know. It's a bit too. It's not lay enough for me. This, and I'm not saying it should be, but it would help if it was a bit more easy for lay people to understand. Okay, so the order was eventually passed by WIFCOM and required the officer of the watch to order all stations to hold reports. Don't know what that means. The lack of any recoverable data from Big Brother prevents the SI team from determining when and what orders were given. So that, again, from a control structure analysis perspective, that's thrown a bit of a spanner in the works. The officer of the watch below stated in his evidence that he spoke to the officer of the watch on the stanophone and informed him that the control room were having difficulties in understanding his orders. It is the view of the SI team that the failure of the communication system compounded the problem and delayed the execution of the slow astern order. Okay, great. So stanophone, I think we mentioned that yesterday, didn't we? There it is, stanophone, there it is. Fantastic. Okay, so let's just have a quick check of the chat and have a bit of a drink. What's been said? So Mark says a telegraph on a British submarine is an engine order telegraph, a device used to transmit speed and direction commands from the bridge to the engine room. Yeah, so it's about, they are control actions, but they're kind of feedback as well. Engine order telegraph purpose to send commands from the bridge to the engineers in the engine room about desired speed and direction of the vessel. Function, the person on the bridge would move a lever to a specific setting, e.g. ahead, full, slow ahead, stop, which would be indicated on the dial at both the bridge and the engine room. Modern uses, while modern submarines have automated systems, the telegraph remains a critical backup for emergencies. Yeah, absolutely. James Savage, hi James again. Sounds like a verbal order was given. The helm would probably have used the telegraph to inform those who actually made the change in RPM and the direction. Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, James. Fantastic. So not long now, last page for today. So I hope everyone's enjoying it and getting a lot from this. At 0628, the echo sounder was turned on. Ah, there we go, look. So echo sounder, where is it? Echo sounder, there we go. Echo sounder use. Excuse me. Echo sounder down there, look, everyone. So that was turned on by somebody. Fantastic. Let's assume it was the petty officer of the watch. So that information will be provided back to somewhere. I'm not sure where, but it's somewhere on the submarine. And that will provide information back to somebody who will be able to make decisions on it. I don't know who that is at this stage. There was something else that I didn't include. What was it? I said it a minute ago and I've ignored it. Where is it? Big Brother. There we go, Big Brother. What is Big Brother, everybody? Let's have a look. So we need to include Big Brother down here. Don't know what it does, but it might be relevant. It might just be recording information. So it's just a sensor creating a process model for the benefit of the investigators, maybe. I don't know. There we go. So the echo sounder was turned on up to the ground and it shows a rapidly shoaling trace from 45 metres to 1 metre. So it's quite deep in that location until it's not. The blacking out would have been when the CO switched from the forward transducers to the after ones. The after transducer is in the base of the rudder, which supports the assessment that the rudder was the first part of the hull to the ground. The SI team have been unable to identify who switched on the echo sounder trace on, although the digital depth recorder element was running and displaying on the helmsman panel. Neither the helmsman or the SCOWW noticed the sounding or it reducing until after the grounding. Okay, so that's kind of digital depth recorder. So we've got one of those. Let's put that over there, digital depth recorder. Oh, there we go. Oh yeah, and actually, let me just put this fore and aft transducers. Pardon me. There we go. The reason I put that in there is just to emphasise the point that I just would have assumed that you'd have a display that has depth transducers that show the different parts of the submarine in relation to the depth of the wherever it is. I didn't kind of appreciate that you'd have to switch between one or the other. That just seems a bit odd, but anyway. I suppose maybe it's also emissions control. I don't know how that system works, so you don't want the thing pinging away while you're trying to do something sneaky beaky. Secret squirrel, but anyway, let's keep moving. So the echo, going back. Where is it? Helmsman's panel. So let's go back over here. The helmsman has a panel, so let's give them a panel. Helmsman. Is that right? Helmsman panel. Yeah, panel. So this is a human machine interface. And that includes information about the echo sounder. Sorry, the digital. Yeah, the echo sounder or digital depth recorder. Digital depth recorder. Sorry. So let me just fix that. It's not that one. It's that one. Excuse me. And that panel will be there, and that panel apparently provides information to both the helmsman, but also the SCOOW. Where's the SCOOW gone? Oh, there they are, look. There we go. Let's put them over there. That's the one. That's it. So you've got it and you've got it. Okay. Notice the sounding or it reducing until after the grounding. The echo sounder trace Should be running confined waters at patrol routine. Was this on patrol routine? I know they said they were on a particular routine earlier on, but I wasn't sure they were on patrol routine. Oh, they were on patrol routine. There it is, everybody. Patrol routine. So it should have been on, according to that, but it wasn't. So why? Why not? Why was it not? But was not on this occasion. Should be running confined waters, but not on this occasion. Okay, so why is that? So let's go back to the... I think we talked about it, didn't we? Echo sounder use. Why was it not on? Echo, that's right, isn't it? Echo sounder trace. Yeah, echo sounder, that's it. Right, so where are we? So the responsibility to run it rests with the officer of the watch. It is the view of the SI team that throughout the build-up of the grounding at no time did the officer of the watch take any action to turn away from the most dangerous course, which was taking him directly towards land. When he gave reasons for not altering to port, he always had the option at any time in the inked-in boat transfer grid of turning to starboard. It is the view of the SI team that his lack of situational awareness, no previous experience of operating in this area in the dark, and his incomplete preparations before proceeding to the bridge were the major causal factor in the grounding. He, as officer of the watch, was responsible for the safe navigation of the submarine. Right, I'm going to get on my hobby horse now, everybody, because I think this is quite ridiculous. So prepare. When you think about this through the concept of a control structure model, you've clearly got this officer of the watch at the sort of the top of the pyramid, the pinnacle. And you could say, well, it's their responsibility for the safe navigation of the submarine. And that might well be what the intention is. But when you actually look at the control structure and how many different parts of that control structure are responsible for different sub-functions of that overall responsibility for safe navigation of the submarine, it kind of becomes obvious that it's really not appropriate to point at this individual and say, well, you know, all the things they didn't do, that was the issue. Because there was many other things going on. You know, for example, the issues with the communication system that contributed to delays in control actions and feedback. Is that the responsibility of the officer of the watch? Is it fair and appropriate to criticise them when those things were important aspects in the control structure? What about, you know, like it says there about the echo sounder trace? You know, a senior person in the control structure, you know, is it really appropriate that they're overloaded with so many responsibilities that they have to remember everything and be a really high-performing person all the time, no matter what the conditions are? You know, these responsibilities should be allocated appropriately around the control structure to make sure that that control structure overall is able to fulfill the safety constraints. And in this case, it sounds like the officer of the watch had many, many different things to do. They might not necessarily have been the most skilled or experienced person, but why didn't they have some support, help and support to do that? You know, there's no mention of them having any kind of buddy or assistant to help with all of these many things. And I'm kind of thinking that, you know, somebody on the bridge, you know, sticking their head out the top of the submarine and doing stuff in the dark, I'm not sure that they should be responsible for switching on the echo sounder. Somebody else should have that responsibility. So, I don't know, I'm a bit uncomfortable with that. I think that's kind of demonstrating a deficiency with the overall control structure for the operation of the submarine in the context of safe separation from grounding or other vessels. And just saying that this one person has the responsibility for everything, you know, without breaking it down and giving them the capabilities and ability to succeed, I think it's a bit ridiculous, to be honest. But again, this is, you know, I'm on my Hobbit horse a little bit there, but, you know, when I talk about STAMP and the benefits and, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, SWOT analysis, one of the strengths of STAMP-based analysis, when you build a control structure model and start exploring the control loops like we've done today and yesterday, you can start to realize that our existing control structures are actually quite fragile and susceptible to, things like this. And so that's a strength, but it's also a bit of a threat, because obviously if you're exploring an existing way of doing things using a control structure model and you identify deficiencies in the way roles and responsibilities are allocated to controllers in that structure, of course, there's a bit of a tradition there that's going to have to be challenged or talked about. Because if that's the way it's always been, and we're highlighting with new eyes, new lenses, hey, actually this control structure for this type of operation is actually inadequate for these many different reasons, technical, people, organizational, structural, procedural, XYZ, then, we're going to have to do something different here. And that means doing some work and spending some money that people might not be willing or able to do. So, there's a bit of a challenge there that we have to overcome. But I'm really uncomfortable with this. I don't think the control structure as described was adequate in the first place. Even if it was working, it sounds quite fragile. But again, I'm a relative layperson to this, so please, give me some abuse in the comments and give me some education. So what comments we've got? Amit says, sorry I joined late. Where is control process? Yesterday I thought I saw submarine. Maybe I am mixing up. Question, when do we call something sensor actuator in STPA? It is proximity to control process, and sensor is feedback and actuator is controlled action towards control process. My apologies if my question is naive. I am here to learn from your experience. Don't worry, Amit, it's perfectly fine. I think Mark, he's added a comment. Hi, Amit. I think Simon is not there yet, but I would agree that the overall control process is the submarine. Could make a case that the rudder, engines, etc. could be the control process of the submarine. Could be a matter of level of abstraction. Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm doing here is I'm building the control structure based on the content of what's in the report. And so whenever I identify something that's a candidate controller, I'll stick that in there. Then I try and arrange it in a broad hierarchy with the physical process at the bottom. And the physical at the process at the bottom here is the submarine. So I'll just zoom in, that's the submarine and its trajectory. And then, of course, all the other sensors and actuators and things like that, they're either related to the submarine or the environment. So that, like the optronics mast, for example, that's a sensor. The fore-aft transducers, they're a sensor. The echo sounder, that's a type of sensor as well. The digital depth recorder, is that a sensor? It's collecting information and recording it. So you could say that the record that recorder is creating is a process model of some type, but I'm just going to leave it in there for this stage. I've not refined it yet. In the case of the, let's put the divers over here. There we go. Actually, put them on the right-hand side. There we go. In terms of the submarine's communications equipment, the CR radio, control room radio, that's a mixture of an actuator and a sensor, and it's in relation to communicating off board the submarine. So it could be in relation to communicating with the OMAR, for example. So again, I'm just trying to arrange things in a control structure, and then I'll tidy it up and make it a lot more crystallized, if you like, later on. Fantastic. S for scapegoating. Potentially, Mark. Yeah, potentially. I mean, as is with a lot of these type of organisations in the structures that they have, somebody has to be responsible, and it's typically the guy or girl at the top. But again, it's not helpful or appropriate to point at the person at the tip of the spear when they're not in a position in the control structure to be able to issue safe control actions. If they've not got situational awareness, that's not just their own responsibility. If the radio communication system is not allowing their control actions and feedback to get through, how is that their responsibility? Who's in control of the radio communication system, for example? So yeah, that's I think just to summarize that, I can appreciate in that type of organization they are responsible for safe navigation, but we have to look at that in the context of the control structure. who or what else is involved in that structure, what equipment is involved, who or what is responsible for that equipment, the software or the network or whatever. Anyway, let's move on. So this is the last section I'm going to do today. I'm going to organise one of these for tomorrow, and I think we'll probably be able to. Well, maybe we'll get through this section here tomorrow, and then I'm going to have to do that on Friday, or I'll just have to do an extra session during the day, maybe at a different time. I'm trying to get the time zone as late as possible in the day, UK time, Zulu time, so the most people in the Western Hemisphere can get this. But I might have to do an extra one of these sessions. And of course, you can watch the recording and give me some abuse on YouTube if you like. Right, so let's just have a quick drink. Check the comments again. Mark says he agrees. Thanks, Mark. There we go. Right, so post-grounding actions. So the submarine, I'll zoom in a bit more so you can see, sorry. The submarine grounded, speed 0 at 06:35 Zulu. It was finally concluded that the submarine had grounded after several more minutes. The executive officer came down from the bridge to inform the CO of his thoughts. They met in the control room. Because of the gentle nature of the grounding, it did not give any cause for immediate concern, and as such, no one in any position of responsibility felt there was any immediate threat to the submarine. Yeah. So the question there, thinking back to the control loop, so we've got the CO and the XO and everyone else in the control room gaining a mental model, a set of beliefs about what's happened and where they are, and then they've made a decision that they don't think it's such a big issue at that point in time. So, whilst we're not talking about this particular accident, let's imagine a different scenario where there was something else going on the seabed, maybe some cables or, I don't know, a shipwreck or, I don't know, something like that. Maybe it's rock instead of soft ground. How would they have known that? What feedback should need for the future to help them make those better decisions? Were the systems that they had adequate to give them good confidence that their belief was okay and they could make appropriate decisions? Because, in a different circumstance, maybe there was not adequate feedback to make that safe decision, and maybe we should think about, from a system design, are there any other types of sensors or other feedback that they can be provided with to keep them aware and help them make better decisions? It's maybe a rhetorical question there, but I'm trying to stretch your understanding. So as a consequence, there was no automatic reaction to take the submarine to emergency stations. The SI understands why this might be, and believes it to be a regrettable oversight, but one that by itself did not further endanger the submarine on this occasion. A number of those interviewed stated that emergency stations should have been ordered to get the entire crew up and conducting phase 1 checks. It was admitted by a number of key personnel that the EOP, I think that's Emergency Operating Procedure for Grounding, could not be readily found due to the fact it was included as part of the collision emergency operating procedure. Right, okay, that's interesting. Okay, so let's just steal, which one is it? I don't know. Let's just steal that one for a minute. So this is interesting. Okay, so we've got these things called EOPs, and if I remember correctly, they're emergency operational procedures, something like that. And those emergency operational procedures will have various types, various things that are defined. In this case, we've got one for grounding, EOP, and then we've got one for collision, EOP. Now, of course, in principle, every senior decision maker and the people that will enact the content of these procedures should know what the content of those things are, and be able to act upon it, immediately, straight away. And so that the grounding EOP was inside the collision EOP, and that they didn't have a collision, suggests that the way that information is structured and the decisions behind how that information is grouped together needs to change. There needs to be a review of that and a change, because like in this case, there is a grounding event, but it's not immediately obvious how to get to the grounding EOP procedure without looking in the collision. And again, let's say all the lights go off, the grounding is in such a way that causes the lights go off, as a silly example, or the screens are stopped working. Are those procedures in physical form available to the people that need to make those decisions? I'm guessing they probably are, but I'm just trying to start some thoughts about it, what the implications might be. The WEO took charge of initiating a full set of rounds of the submarine to ensure the submarine was watertight. Phase 1 damage checks were not ordered, but in the absence of any reports within the first few minutes, they were assumed to be complete by default. Ooh, okay, that's interesting. At this point, the CO was attempting to use blows and a head and a stern propulsion to drive the submarine free. Yeah, I mean, that might not have been the right, safe thing to do, but they got away with it this time. Okay, right, what was it? The WEO. So there's a full set of rounds. Excuse me. And then phase 1 damage checks not ordered. There we go. Okay. Right, I think that's everything we can do today in the time that we've had. There's a lot there to think about. Whilst this seems like quite a straightforward incident, there's a lot more to it than that. And I think as we get through the next session, so the next section is looking at navigation plans, records, equipment. Interest in the equipment section is, well, it's half a page long, which is interesting. I would have thought that there'd be more to it than that, but anyway. Yeah, okay. Are there any questions, comments, compliments, concerns, commiserations you'd like to stick in the chat? And I'll just have a quick drink and then we can address those. But otherwise, I'll set up another session for tomorrow and we'll carry on. We'll get through it, everybody. It's been good going. I just want to say thank you for your attention. Thank you for taking part. Because when you're just talking to the screen and there's no feedback, you don't know whether anyone's listening. I can't see anybody on the screen. It's just nice to have those comments and encouragement in there. And it's good to see that you're engaged and that you're interested, because I'm really passionate about this. I genuinely believe that STAMP, STPA and CAST will transform the way that we do system safety engineering, especially in complex systems like submarines, having had experience in that part of the world. But also in terms of investigations, because it will help us to investigate more clearly, more cleanly, and avoid pointing fingers and hindsight bias. And as I say, in this particular case, the officer of the watch has obviously had a lot of, should have done this, should have done that, didn't do this. It's their responsibility. And I just don't think that's helpful or appropriate. Certainly not when we need to learn from these things and learn better. And I think one of the biggest things I've learned here so far is the officer of the watch had an incredible amount of things to do. And then the fact that control structure was evolving and changing across that short amount of time. I think this accident was pretty much inevitable based on what I've read so far. And we have to avoid this. You don't want to crash submarines. They're very expensive. And you just don't want to do that. So if there's anything I could do to help prevent that in the future and you want some help and support, please get in touch. And likewise, if you just visit my website, so my website, no, not Amazon. You don't want to go to Amazon. Where's my website? God, there we go. So I'll stick that in the chat. You're welcome to visit my website, click on I Need Help Now, give me your name, email address, phone number, and what you want to talk about, and we can have a conversation and see how I can possibly help improve the way that you do investigations and how you do your system safety engineering. Okay, so let's just have a look then. So looking at the chat, we've got Amit says, Mark, thank you. I was wondering what are control process and what are the hierarchy control structures of any number of controllers, the interactions of control actions and feedback. I guess I was making a mental picture. Thank you for walking through. Yes, Amit, it is, this is a preliminary control structure model, and I will improve it and, make it a bit clearer and easier to understand. It is a work in progress, and that's the nature. When you're doing these things yourselves, it is going to be messy, it is going to be difficult, it is going to be painful to abstract and visualize. And of course, when you're communicating to others that aren't used to the concept of control structures, it is going to be challenging communicating with them as well. And that's okay. I'm here to say that it is dirty, it is messy, and it does get easier over time. But these are mental skills, decision making, control algorithms, and beliefs and mental models about how to do control structure modeling. And it is a distinct skill set. And it can come naturally to some people, and it can be more challenging to develop for others. So just don't worry about that. That's okay. So Mark says a WEO is a weapon engineering officer, a senior role responsible for the maintenance, operation and safety of a submarine's weapons and electrical systems. This includes ensuring the integrity of weapons, managing electrical power and leading a team of engineers, especially on board nuclear powered submarines. Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Mark. Every day is a school day. Elvira, hi Elvira, good to see you. Thanks for coming along. I need to reply to your email. Sorry. I would love to contribute more to the discussion. Would it be possible to review the analysis so far so that I can join tomorrow with more informed insight? Yeah, the yesterday's live stream is available on LinkedIn now. I'll stick a comment in the chat, link to it, or you can visit my YouTube channel, which is where is it? I'll stick it to the top. There's my YouTube channel. There we go. Control C, paste. I'll just reply to you. There you go. You can go and watch it on there. This video I will stick on there tonight when it's finished uploading. And yeah, if you want to have a conversation, Elvira, we can do. Great. Who else? So Amit, can you share the control structure so far? I'll do that on the next session. I think we're going a bit long tonight, but I'll do that tomorrow if you want to join. Elvira, thanks. You're welcome. Great work. Thanks, Amit. Appreciate it. James, should is still important, but needs supporting rationale to explain why. Yes, absolutely, James. Totally agree on that. Great. Okay. Well, if that's everything, everyone's all tired out, ready to have a rest, lay down. It's fantastic. Thank you so much for coming along and for your attention. And I will see you on the next live stream tomorrow, same time. And then I'll also arrange the live Zoom session where we can go into this in more detail and ask questions face to face in real time. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.